We're delighted to have our speaker today as Jack Davis from Bozeman, Montana. Jack and his wife Susan are longtime Wichita Postcard Club members and friends, and they attended many of our previous shows. Jack has been a club meeting speaker. I think this is his fourth or fifth time, and I'm delighted to introduce him today for this presentation about William Henry Jackson and the Detroit Publishing Company. Thanks, Jack, for participating today. Take it away.
Thank you everyone for attending. My name is Jack Davis. First of all, before we get started, Susan and I want to thank Hal and Alan for the important service they are providing in recording these presentations. Much of the information that the speakers share with the audience would be lost if they weren't documenting and recording these presentations. So I really want to thank them. They are producing professional educational videos, and they do a terrific job. Today, I am going to examine William Henry Jackson in his association with the Detroit Publishing Company. I will also discuss the transition of chromolithographic prints to chromo postcards. Both of these topics have a Yellowstone Park connection, which we will take a look at. These are two portraits of William Henry Jackson, one when he was a young man, the other he was an elderly gentleman. Jackson was assigned photographer for the Hayden Geological Surveys in the 1870s. He first visited the Upper Yellowstone region in 1871 and worked alongside the famous landscape artist Thomas Moran. Jackson's photographs and Moran's artwork helped to convince Congress to establish Yellowstone as the first national park. Jackson founded a photography and publishing company in 1883 in Denver, Colorado. He went out of business in 1893 because of the silver crash. His customers no longer could afford to buy his photographs. And in 1896, Jackson was approached by the founders of a new company, the Detroit Photographic Company, to buy 20,000 of his glass negatives and to join them as a partner in their firm. He traveled around the country from 1898 to 1902, taking photographs for Detroit Publishing, and in '93 he was promoted to plant manager in charge of production, and he then had to work from the factory in Detroit. he worked for Detroit Publishing until 1924. I'm going to say DPC to make it easier to talk about that, but the DPC went into receivership in 1924, and Jackson retired at that time. Because of the work that he did for Detroit Publishing, he's often referred to as the father of the picture postcard. Jack Haynes was a young boy when he first met William Henry Jackson at Mammoth Hot Springs. Jack's father was F.J. Haynes, a pioneer photographer, and Haynes was given the title official photographer of the Northern Pacific Railroad. F.J. spent time in the park from 1881 until he passed away in 1921. He established a series of 15 Haynes photoshops throughout Yellowstone, in the hotels and at the major tourist attractions. Jack Haynes, who is seen here as a young boy on a tricycle, the cabinet photo by his father, spent 76 of his 78 summers at Mammoth Hot Springs. He began working as a counter attendant in the Haynes photo shop at Mammoth when he was 12 years old. He advanced from a summer employee to join his father as a junior partner in the family business in 1908. Jack was trained in photography and assumed ownership of Haynes Incorporated when F.J. Haynes retired in 1916. Jack met William Henry Jackson in 1892. He was only 8 years old, but they maintained a relationship throughout his life. Because he knew William Henry Jackson, he was familiar with Detroit publishing. He purchased the bankruptcy inventory of DPC in 1932. He had all the merchandise and inventory shipped to St. Paul and then on to Bozeman, Montana. The inventory was put into storage at the Haynes warehouse and also at his personal garage in town. This photograph, which was taken by Jack Haynes, shows William Henry Jackson, Jack's wife Isabel, and their daughter Lida. This was at the 1934 National Park stamp dedication ceremony held at Old Faithful Post Office. The image on the stamp is an etching of an 1885 photo taken by F.J. Haynes. If you do a search on that, artificial intelligence comes back and says the photo was by Jack Haynes. It's not correct. I don't know how to correct artificial intelligence, but what I'm telling you is not artificial, it's actually true. Lida Haynes managed the Haynes business after Jack passed away in 1962. Tragically, unfortunately, Lida Haynes, who was trained in photography and was going to take the family business over, died in an automobile accident at the age of 21. Isabel eventually ended up selling the Haynes concessionaire business in 1968. So the Haynes family was active in Yellowstone Park for 87 years. They were the most influential family in Yellowstone, and their photographs continue to be collected today. When Isabel passed away at the age of 90, there was a Haynes family estate auction that was held in Bozeman at the fairgrounds. This was the largest sale of Yellowstone and Haynes-related items in history. And in the estate auction was a large number of Detroit publishing related material, postcards, chromolithographs, ephemera, and also some of the Schmucker paintings that they had acquired that no one knew they were in the inventory. There were also postcards and chromolithographs from the parent company Photoglob of Switzerland. This Kurt-Teich linen postcard shows the Haynes picture shop at Mammoth. The mailman is delivering mail there, and if you look, you can see a woman and a small child. We think this is Isabel and Lida getting their picture taken. The Detroit publishing merchandise that Jack Haynes acquired at the bankruptcy auction, much of it was put for sale in this building. And that also included some of the Schmucker paintings, which I think there were 11 or 12 of the paintings that were sold, and they were sold in this building. Thomas Moran was a famous landscape artist. He worked closely with William Henry Jackson in 1871. They worked together, they helped each other, they became very good friends. Moran created a series of watercolor paintings that he did in 74, 75, and he collaborated with Louis Pring to create a chromolithographic portfolio for the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. Peter Marzio, who was the director of the Fine Art Museum in Houston, stated that each Pring chromo was a masterpiece. He said, "This is Pring's greatest work, and it represents the high tide of chromolithography in America." These chromolithographs had as many as 56 color separations. And it's counterintuitive to think that the height of American chromolithography would have taken place as early as it did, because the 50,000 series Detroit photographic chromolithographs were 24 years after that. Pring's studio in Boston was destroyed by fire in 1877, and there were only approximately 150 portfolios that were thought to have survived. Most of those portfolios are in institutions. There's a few of them in private collections, but many of the portfolios that were in private collections have been divided and sold piece by piece. So there's very few complete sets of the chromos in private collections. Louis Pring was a German-American printer, lithographer, and publisher. He stated at one time that chromolithographs required a minimum of 8 stones, and that highly detailed and colorful works required as many as 40 stones. His Yellowstone portfolio of Moran watercolor paintings had between 27 and 56 color separations. Pring is known as the father of the American Christmas card. He changed his emphasis from producing chromos later in his life and became more interested in promoting art education. This is an 1871 albumen photograph that shows William Henry Jackson with Thomas Moran at Devil's Slide, which is a little bit north of Mammoth Hot Springs. Moran is doing a field sketch. He based his paintings on his sketches and also on Jackson's photographs. Jackson took this wet plate albumen photograph, 1871, and Thomas Moran is standing on the terraces at Mammoth Hot Springs. Jackson would put Moran into some of his photographs for perspective. This is the first Pring chromolithograph of a Thomas Moran watercolor painting of the Mammoth Hot Springs. You can see that Moran also put figures into his images for perspective. And I'm going to take a second and talk just a little bit about the chromolithographic process. And you can look at this and kind of visualize the way it took place. The Detroit Publishing Company developed a new chromolithographic printing process known as photochrome. It was developed in Switzerland in 1895 by the Photoglob company. The formula was a carefully guarded secret. The precise method of printing was only known to those who were working for the company, and they were sworn to secrecy. The process has never been duplicated and remains a mystery. And this is something sometimes when you do presentations, you learn something you never knew before. That's what happened to me with this presentation. And one thing that I did not know, I had not seen, is that there were technicians who custom mixed and applied specific colors and tones, and these technicians were called chromists. And chromist is a combination of chromo and artist. They never used the black ink, black per se. They mix colors to create dark and light tones. And we'll see an example of that a little bit later in some of the smoke from the Detroit Publishing chromolithographs. The information that I uncovered was that to produce Fostent postcards by Detroit Publishing, they used between 9 and 14 color separations, 9 and 14 different stones. The DPC chromos used as many as 20 color separations. And if you visualize this chromolithograph, it may have used as many as 56 color separations. This, once again, Prang's chromos and this portfolio were considered to be the high point of American chromolithography. Chromolithography was a very labor-intense and expensive printing process. The cost of producing chromos was the end result of the number of color separations needed to achieve the desired quality of the print. And it's estimated that at least a minimum of 4 times as much labor was required to produce a chromolithograph as a 4-color offset printing. As a result of these, chromos were expensive, and they could not compete with less expensive prints, especially at the turn of the century when postcards were being published using chromolithographic printing. Not only were the postcards less expensive, they could be sent through the mail with a message. Chromo prints were very, very popular after the Civil War through the end of the 19th century, but they soon fell out of favor at the beginning of the 20th century. This is a 1900 private mailing card chromolithograph by Detroit Photographic Company. It required between 9 and 14 color separations. If you compare the Prang chromolithograph to the Detroit photographic chromolithograph, there's 2 main differences. One of the big differences is the number of stones that were used to create the 2 images. But the other difference, and it's also a substantial difference, is that Prang's portfolio of chromo was based on a painting, a watercolor painting. The Detroit photographic chromo was based on a photograph. So it's a different image. On the left is an 1872 albumin photograph, William Henry Jackson. The same image was created by Detroit Publishing Company. In this case, it's 1905, so the company has changed its name. And you can see the difference between the 2 images, and you can also see in the Detroit chromo how the chromist, the artist, would add color, and they would also manipulate the image for the geyser. And then if you go back to Prang's chromolithograph, you see the rich color. It goes from a dark tone to a rich light tone to almost a white gouache. Gosh, I can't say the word very well. And the water that's coming from the geyser and some of the runoff is very, very opaque white watercolor. Another example of an early Jackson photograph and a later Detroit photographic chromolithograph. And then once again, you're looking at Prang's chromolithograph of Moran watercolor painting. This is similar to Moran's famous oil painting, the great, I should say, the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. I've only said it 5 million times in my life. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And the oil painting that he created is hanging in Congress. This is very interesting. We actually had access to original material in the archives of Yellowstone Park. We have a close relationship with the people there at the park. This is an original Thomas Moran field sketch that he did of Excelsior Geyser. You can see that he has written notes to himself in pencil on the field sketch. And then this was the final watercolor painting that Moran did, that Prang did the chromolithograph. If you compare the 2 images, you can see how he transcribed the field sketch into the painting. it's an amazing transformation. And the last praying portfolio that we will see in this presentation, on the left is a Jackson albumin photograph, 1871. On the right is Prang's portfolio chromolithograph of the Moran painting. You could see how these two different formats would impress members of Congress. The photographs were documentary evidence that these features actually existed, that they were real, that they weren't made up. And Moran's paintings took them to a higher level, a more emotional level. So between the two types of images, it made a compelling case for Congress to establish the national park. Now we switch gears and we go to the 50,000 series for Detroit Photographic Company. These photographs were taken by William Henry Jackson when he was traveling. These have as many as 20 color separations. Actually, the work that Detroit Publishing did was very, very good. At the time, it was some of the best chromolithography on the market. The bathers at Coney Island, rapids of the St. Mary's River, Gough, St. Augustine, West End, New Orleans, and this is where I want to point out the chromists, the technicians that mixed the colors, didn't use black per se. They used a combination of colors to create dark and light tones. So if you look at the smoke that's coming out of the chimney, it's dark and then it becomes lighter. And that same process you can see with this train in Mississippi going from a dark tone to a lighter tone, but they never actually used the color black. Another example of a dark tone to a light tone, and this is how the tintist would color the chromolithographs. They did really an excellent job of doing that. Jackson took a series of photographs of mining in Colorado. I would say there's probably at least a dozen in the series. This is one image in that series. These are Colorado pack train ready for the mines. And the series of mining photos and chromolithographs are very collectible. Hal probably recognizes this image. This is New Mexico, Los Pueblos de Taos. Jackson photographed Native American pueblos. He also photographed portraits of Native Americans. I've always liked this image. I thought it kind of gave you the sense of being there. This is the Golden Gate, San Francisco. And this is Golden Gate, Yellowstone, which is kind of, it's close, it's not the same. But this is one of the best examples of color separation by Detroit Photographic Company. And the colors in the rocks are almost iridescent. This is the last Detroit chromolithograph we will look at. The image on the right is the only image that William Henry Jackson actually shows up in for Detroit Publishing. We think this was taken in 1892. We're not positive, but we think that was the date it was taken. Sometimes it's hard to date some of his images because it was at different periods of time that he was in the park. And on the left is actually a Fostent postcard that's a reproduction of an 1872 photograph that's been tinted and produced as a chromolithographic postcard. There's a little bit of a mystery about this chromo. We don't really know everything about it. We just know a little bit about it. But we know for a fact that it was taken after 1904 because the Old Faithful Inn was opened June the 1st, 1904. So the photograph may have been taken in 1904. If it was, it wasn't processed. until it wasn't offered for sale, probably until 1905. We also believe that the photographer was Henry Peabody. It's attributed to Peabody. Jackson at this point was working in the factory in Detroit, so he could not have taken this photograph. This is the same image as a Fostent postcard, copyright 1909. It was produced later. And this is the chromolithograph on the left, the postcard on the right. You can see the difference between the artist that created the chromolithograph with as many as 20 color separations and the postcard with only 9 to 14 color separations. In 1905, a series of postcards was produced by Detroit Photographic Company of the interior of the O Faithful Inn, which once again we assume was taken by Henry Peabody. One of the interesting things about Detroit publishing O Faithful Inn postcards is that they were never offered for sale in the park. F.J. Haynes controlled all the gift shops and the hotels, and he didn't offer Detroit publishing cards for sale. He viewed them as a threat and a competitor. Early in his 1900, circa 1900, 1901, Haynes went to Detroit Publishing, tried to negotiate for them to produce his postcards. They could never come to an agreement, and so Haynes refused to offer them for sale in the gift shops. And Detroit Publishing sued Haynes for constriction of sales, and they lost the suit, so then they were never able to sell their postcards in the Haynes photo shops. This was taken in 1911. Henry Peabody had left the park at this point. The photographer of this image, the New Canyon Hotel, was a photographer from Bozeman. We know the photographer. We've collected some of his photographs, Albert Schlechten. And Detroit Photographic Company and also Detroit Publishing Company contracted with other photographers, especially after Jackson started working in the factory in 1903, and reproduced images of many different photographers throughout the country. Now, this is an interesting kind of juxtaposition, I guess. These are Haynes 100 series postcards, but instead of being the interior of the O Faithful Inn, this is the interior of the Canyon Hotel, which is kind of unusual. And these postcards were offered for sale in the gift shop inside the Canyon Hotel because Haynes managed and controlled those gift shops. But for Haynes to compete with Detroit Publishing, he had to go to Europe. He went to Germany to have the 100 series postcards printed by Louis Glaser. So to me, it's kind of ironic that Haynes had so much going on at the O Faithful Inn, and yet he didn't have any interior postcards of the O Faithful Inn. He didn't have as much going on at Canyon, but that's where his interior postcards were sold. So it's a little bit strange. There was a lot of dynamics going back and forth between Haynes and Detroit Publishing. There was one store in the park, one gift shop that offered Detroit Publishing merchandise for sale, and that's this gift shop, which is located just below the O Faithful Inn, this Clamor Curios store. If you look, you can see a stagecoach coming up the road, and to the right is Castle Geyser. This Detroit Publishing postcard is the interior of that gift shop, and you can visualize, where the postcards are being sold. There were other curios, souvenirs for sale in the gift shop. Susan and I, when I married Susan, she was collecting Yellowstone So part of the deal with me getting married was I had to help her, but it was fun. We had a good time. And we collected a lot of these kinds of things in our collection. The collection is now in the archives of the park. We had approximately 20,000 items. So for all you collectors out there, don't feel too bad. It could get worse, but this is one of the only, or it is the only actually postcard that shows the interior of a gift shop inside Yellowstone Park. One thing, we're going to switch gears just a little bit, and I want to talk about the Payne-Aldrich tariff. This was actually the beginning of the end of the Golden Age. The tariff was placed on postcards and other printed materials coming into the country. They were especially aimed at German postcards, high quality German postcards. There's a lot of information in this that you're welcome to read, but down near the bottom, I find it interesting. There's a postcard publisher from Wisconsin stated, as these American manufacturers apparently could not turn out as good a card as the German manufacturers, they probably believed a protective tariff would assist them to overcome the obstacle. We got the increased tariff at their behest and the bankruptcy of hundreds of postcard manufacturers and firms followed. So I find that fairly interesting. And at this time, this is an example for Haynes, but on the left is a Haynes 100 series postcard printed in Germany by Louis Glaser. On the right is a postcard, a four color offset postcard, CMYK, printed by the Kurtite Company, 1920 to 1929. Larry Lancaster helped me date this. I had a hard time coming up with that date. You can see the difference. It's the same photograph, the same image, and it's a stark contrast to the quality of printing and color separation from the German postcard to the American postcard. This is about the best example that I know of to show the difference between the two printing processes. In the Haynes estate auction, in one of the boxes that we acquired, was this invoice from Louis Glaser. It's dated 1913. This is probably the last, this may have been the last order that Haynes placed with Louis Glaser. He placed this order for cards in the 100 series. And I never really paid much attention to the invoice until this presentation. But then I started looking closer at it. There were 270,000 postcards that were ordered. The total cost was $4,164. I did the math, and the gross, that equaled about 0.015% of a postcard. The gross profit was around close to 85%. So I did the math on this, and it's pretty amazing that on a 1 cent postcard that you would make an 85% profit. Haynes sold the postcards in sets of 50 and 100, so he made a little bit more than 0.84 cents. The Haynes family was estimated between 1899 and 1966, estimated to have produced approximately 55 million Yellowstone Park postcards. That's just one firm, it's just one publisher. And I did the math on that. It came out to be approximately $47 million gross profit. Now, you have to think that this happened at the turn of the century through the very early 1960s, when money was $1 million was a lot more money in 1935 than it is today. even though I'm sure some of you would argue that point. But if you had $1 million in 1935, you were very, very wealthy. And these are postcard sales only. These are not the other souvenir sales. They're just postcard sales. And it's only the 100 series. So it's pretty amazing. But I found that this invoice was very, very interesting. Now, one thing I want to talk about is the creation of the Detroit Photographic Company, and the son of the president of the Detroit Savings and Dime Bank, which was one of the most successful banks in the Midwest, was one of the founders of Detroit Photographic Company. And I believe, and I've found evidence to this later on that substantiates what I thought, is that the reason that William Livingston, who was one of the founders, the reason that he established Detroit Photographic Company was to reproduce fine art as prints. It wasn't his intention to produce postcards. So when the company was founded in 1896, he did not know, he could not realize that 2 years later, Congress would authorize the use of private mailing cards. This was something he had never thought about. And this showroom in Detroit, downtown Detroit, all of the images on the wall are art reproduction images. There's no view images. So what happened was, when postcards were introduced, private mailing cards, and then soon after that postcards, penny postcards, the chromolithographic prints fell out of favor. They went out of favor very quickly because there were two main reasons they went out of favor. First of all, they were more expensive. And second of all, you had to mat them or frame them to display them. And the huge advantages that penny postcards had over chromo prints was that they were much, much less expensive. But above and beyond that, they could be sent through the mail with a message. So they were functional. They actually served a purpose. In fact, the golden age of postcards were the main form of communication in the world up until World War I. And they were also the most popular collectibles in the world. So the chromo prints that the Detroit Photographic Company was originally established to produce, the business model completely changed after 2 or 3 years. I don't think Livingston was real happy about it, but there was nothing he could do about it. In the Detroit bankruptcy inventory merchandise that we acquired at the Haynes auction was material from the Photo Glob Company. There were some different pieces from that company, including these two postcards. Also, these two postcards, these were in boxes that were in the Detroit Publishing merch inventory. Compare those to Detroit photographic, chromolithographic postcards, art cards. These are two others. Livingston wanted to reproduce artwork, but more and more view cards are what really took over the market. They also did contract work for some other companies, including Life Publishing Company. This is a postcard, Charles Dana Gibson, copyright 1901, Life Publishing Company. And even though Livingston wasn't excited about doing contract work, in fact, he put it off as long as he could, the contract work that Detroit Photographic and later Detroit Publishing did for the Fred Harvey Company basically kept Detroit Publishing in business. If it wasn't for the Fred Harvey postcards, they probably would have gone out of business much sooner than they did. I threw this in because I found it interesting, and it was in the inventory. I just wanted to share it with you. I never knew that Detroit Publishing published real photo postcards. I was not aware of that. But when we went through the boxes, there was a series of 10 real photo postcards of English churches and cathedrals. I found it very interesting that they did that, and the postcards have very good detail. Probably some of the very last art images that Detroit Publishing published were the Smucker postcards. And these are 8 paintings of 8 sets that Detroit published, copyright 1907. And Tom Mulvaney is the reason that we're looking at this image right here. Leave it to Tom to find something that no one else can find. He's really good at it. But in the auction, and there were boxes and boxes, 200 or 300 boxes of stuff. It was just stuff. In one of the boxes that Tom came across was a chromolithograph of a Smucker painting, and it's the only one that we've found. Now the number is 62004, which indicates that there's probably more in that set. I assume it was a set of 6 because there were 6 paintings. It's a beautiful image. It's really striking. So what that does is it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Detroit produced a chromolithograph in 1907, and yet they never offered it for sale on the market, and probably was the last attempt that they made to produce chromo prints. This is a painting in the motto set by Herrick. Gather ye rosebuds as ye may, O time is still a-flying. And that same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. We commissioned Rick Gary, speaking of Rick Gary, I'm very lucky and fortunate to have been able to work with him in 1966 to do a postcard for us. And this is the postcard he created. Gather ye postcards while ye may. This is the Yellowstone connection, and you'll see the triangle, Detroit Publishing Company, William Henry Jackson, Jack Haynes, Yellowstone Park, Jack and Susan Davis, Bozeman, Montana. And we want to thank Rick for this work. It's really ingenious, and he's a tremendous artist. The last image in this presentation goes full circle. William Henry Jackson goes back to Yellowstone Park. This is circa 1925. After he retired from Detroit Publishing Company, he went back to the park. This is a hand-tinted photograph. And before I quit, I want to thank some people who helped us that we would not have been able to do what we did without their assistance. Nancy Stick Schulte did a tremendous amount of work, and she was gracious enough to pause printing her book, Detroit Publishing Postcards, to include the 50,000 series of chromolithographs that we had just discovered. She put those into the book, and she graciously took her time and effort to do that. She did a lot of work. She deserves a lot of credit for the work that she did for Detroit Publishing. The same goes for James Lowe, Jeff Burdick, and Ben Publ. Without the work that they did going back into the 50s, we would not know what we knew today about Detroit Publishing. Tom Mulvaney, his name keeps coming up. You can't keep this guy out of it. But Tom is directly responsible for Susan and I becoming postcard dealers. And if it wasn't for Tom, I would not be here right now talking to you. Tom's a super guy, a great friend, a tremendous collector, and I want to thank him for all the work that he did. Other people who have helped us are Larry and Thea Lancaster, Andy and Judy DeBoer, Dennis Gorham, Hal Ottaway, and Tal Scott and Valerie Rose. And that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you. Jack, just it's just amazing. We want to turn it to go to Bill Burton for questions.
There's only one comment here, Hal, and I think that's because everybody is so stunned at the information that we've gotten. Jack is just at least overwhelms me, so I get the opportunity to talk, but not to have anything to say. The first thing in is from Michael Block, who says, uh, on the multi-separations, what line screen did they use?
The chromolithographic process was complicated. I don't know everything about it. The Prang used a different process than Detroit Photographic Company, and there's a lot of information that's not known. The business records for the DPC don't survive. It's pretty much a mystery. So I don't know how to answer that question.
Fair enough. Ashley Aarons just says, and I hear the echo of just amazement to her, incredible information and insight. Thank you, Jack.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Good. Go ahead. Who is it?
Nancy Ann.
Oh, hi, Nancy.
You mentioned that they did, was it 20 color separations?
Yes, for the Detroit chromolithographs, yes.
Yeah. So did that mean they were doing a different pass for each one of those 20 colors?
Yes.
Wow.
There was a different
today.
there was a different stone for every color. So the registration had to be perfect. It was very labor intensive. We think that approximately 500 images was all that a stone could create. We're not positive, but it's possible that we've heard that number before. They were very labor intensive, and they took a lot of technical expertise.
Yeah. Kathy Albert asked, are there any other famous photographers that worked for Detroit?
Well, that's a good question. There was William Henry Jackson, there was George Peabody, and then there was several different photographers throughout the country. I don't know who they are. Tom Mulvaney might have a clue. I don't know. There's other people that probably know more about that than I do.
Trying to put me on the spot there, Jack?
Yeah, I've been doing that for a long time.
You have. No, other than you mentioned, Albert Selectin out of Bozeman was involved to some degree. I really don't know any of the other photographers. Wish I did.
Yeah, I have a question.
Please.
I've got this series here, a bunch of matted, look like Detroit images. The AA photograph, the second A has got an umlaut over it. It's a series by Detroit Photographic Company. And I didn't hear you mention these. Is that familiar?
That's out of Switzerland, and they had a working relationship with Switzerland to sell some of the Swiss prints in their shops. So when you see AA, it's a Swiss registration.
Oh, okay.
All right. Jeremy Rose got a good point here. He says, as an FYI, here's an autographed real photo postcard showing William Henry Jackson on horseback. Now, for those of you who can't see it, go click the chat icon at the bottom left of the of your screen. It's Jackson on horseback in Teton National Park in 1933 from his, that is to say, Jeremy Rose collection. Jeremy, do you have anything to say about this beyond that?
Been looking at 19th century photography, and Jackson was very active then. I happened to stumble across this one and thought an autographed postcard of a photographer was an important addition. And it's an interesting view of Jackson late in his life at not Yellowstone, but Teton National Park. But I thought it might be of interest to the group.
I know that Crandall took photographs for Detroit Publishing from that area.
Oh, yeah.
You had mentioned that there were, I don't think you said 6 or a small number of real photo postcards that Detroit published.
Yeah,
Did they actually distribute the real photo postcards, or did they print them on a press from a photo postcard?
you know, that's there were 10 postcards in this box with other stuff. There were photo postcards by Detroit Publishing. I had never seen them before. I didn't know they did them. Hal said he didn't know they did them either. Did you know they did them, Tom Mulvaney? Did you know they did real photo postcards?
I've seen a couple of real photo postcards marked Detroit Publishing, but they're very unusual to find.
So I don't know how to answer the question. I had never seen them before, so I'm not really very knowledgeable about them.
Okay, now we're starting to get appreciation. Betty Drake and Kathy Albert are both in there cheering. Thanks very much, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm curious about the real photo postcards and how they're marked.
The real photo cards?
Yeah, like did they say Detroit Publishing on them, or how are they marked?
If I have your email address, I can send you JPEGs of them.
They're marked
Can
60,000.
I put it in the chat?
They're marked 60,000 series.
Yes, yes. They're in the 60,000 series.
They have the palette of Detroit Publishing Company, a little palette symbol.
Yeah.
Kathy Albert says, thanks for a fascinating presentation. And Mike walks in for saying essentially the same thing.
I got one more, Bill.
Oh, okay.
One more. Hey, Jack, you mentioned that there was a bit of animosity between F.J. Haynes and Detroit Publishing Company because of the refusal of Detroit Publishing Company to, I guess, publish Haynes's cards. I just was wondering if that ever affected the relationship between Haynes and William Henry Jackson, or if that was a totally different issue.
You know, that's a good question, and I've been asked that before. F.J. Haynes was a Jackson wannabe. He wasn't as good a photographer as Jackson. He was a better businessman. And there were a lot of people that didn't like F.J. Haynes because he was very aggressive and eventually got barred from the park, and his son had to take over the business. So F.J. didn't have a real good a reputation. Jackson was beloved by everybody. I think that F.J.'s son Jack and William Henry Jackson became good friends. Jack Haynes was a nice person. He was everyone liked him, but no one liked his father.
Okay.
I don't even think Jack liked his father. Well, when Jack bought the business, FJ made him go take a bank loan out, and he wouldn't carry the papers.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Go right ahead.
I was really struck by sort of like a sideline comment that until World War I, the postcards were the most common means of communication in the world. It seems kind of, yeah, that makes perfectly good sense. But on the other hand, where did that research come from? Do you know? Can you cite a source for that?
Yeah, you know, I've been researching it for 40 years. And
But you don't remember all of it?
I only remember half of it, but I've read that several times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's a pretty common knowledge that during that period of time, between turn of the century and about 1914, postcards were the main form of communication. And things that I've written and talked about, I equate them to the internet almost 100 years later, of how it changed the way people communicated. But then at World War I, it all changed. And then it went to telephone and other kinds of communication. But there was a period of time that postcards were the main form of communication. It shows up several different places.
That's very, very interesting. I'm
Do
thinking,
you agree with that, Tom?
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
You know, here's one thing, David. If you have issues or if you have questions, Tom's my go-to guy. If
I'm
he
his
doesn't
yes
know,
man.
you're
if he
trying to
doesn't
get
know,
off the hook?
well, pretty much. If he doesn't know how the answer, we've got problems.
Yeah.
The Miller book may have talked about that.
Hal, haven't you have heard that before?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I've heard that. And also they say that most people collected postcards and had albums that they kept right out in their family room during that time with all
Right.
the postcards that they received.
Well, and another thing too to follow up is that, and I've also read this several times, the postcards were the most popular collectible in the world during the Golden Age. That's why so many of them still survive.
Yeah.
And they were also a form of entertainment because people used to look at each other's albums when they went to each other's parlors. They would
Yeah.
show each other postcard albums.
Yeah.
You also had RFD, rural farm delivery, that reached out to places that were very difficult to reach otherwise with reasonable rail service as well. So it was a very active communication medium. It was very easy to communicate. So I don't know if I'd say it was the most active forever, but it seems like that would be another factor in why it was so popular and why it was used so heavily.
Yeah.
And post office will deliver more than once a day.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a way to tell somebody I'm coming to visit you this afternoon or see you, etc. Which of course today with mail delivery maybe once a day is not feasible.
Maybe. Yeah.
I'd say some of us still get together and look at postcard albums.
Yeah.
First time I met Jeremy, I carried a giant tote bag full of postcard albums over to his house. And we spent quite a bit of time looking at those.
Yes.
I bet you did.
Thing I was going to say while everyone's here, if you give me a second, I would like to make a tribute. My godfather was Dan Blocker, Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza.
Yeah.
Dan was a high school teacher before he became an actor. He graduated with 3 masters in college history, English, and theater. If Dan were here today, he would say that Hal and Alan are doing a professional job of producing educational videos. He would put them in the same category as Ken Burns. I know this because I know that Dan would respect and support what Hal and Al are doing. The information they are documenting is important. Much of this would be lost without their efforts. So it is important that we take time to realize and acknowledge the importance of history and what it can teach us. If the knowledge and experience people acquire in their lifetimes is not shared and handed down to other generations, it is lost. We all have something unique to share. I want Hal and Alan to know how Dan would feel about what they're doing. And I know that Ken Burns would feel the same way.
Well, thank you. My goodness.
Bill, Jack, I got a present for you here. You may or may not have this postcard, but this shows Dan Blocker and the rest of the Ponderosa gang with their snowmobiles and their stagecoach. And I bought that for you because I knew that Dan Blocker was your godfather.
Well, thank you. That's nice of you.
Thank you, Jack. This has been incredible, and as well as all of your previous programs that are all recorded and are available here on YouTube. So take a look and enjoy and keep on learning more about our hobby.